Hello, this is Melinda Blazer, and as part of A.T. Still University's Education 7500 course, today we'll be discussing backchanneling as an innovative approach to learner engagement. This session will cover the definition of backchanneling and specifically in the context of digital technologies. We'll review applications for education and identify several technology tools that can be applied in an educational setting. We'll discuss the educational research about using backchannels in the classroom and outline some innovative ways that backchanneling can be used in a higher education course. In that context, we'll be reviewing how backchanneling may be applied to a course that I teach, which is the Physician Assistant 390 Senior Seminar course. This is a course that spans the entirety of the second year of a PA school at our program, which is the final year of the curriculum. And its ultimate goal is to prepare students for transition into clinical practice. There are several learning outcomes as part of that course, but the three that we'll focus on today for engaging the application of backchanneling will be to create a CV and resume, to cultivate medical billing and coding skills, and to discuss PA professionalism requirements. So at its core, backchanneling is simply an opportunity for students to engage in informal discussions about course content. Donnelly in 2014 notes that historically backchanneling referred to verbal comments or body language that coincided with conversation or content delivery in a classroom setting. Our generation may think about note passing or nudging the person next to them and whispering about what you thought the professor might be talking about. These verbal and nonverbal cues help to direct both the speakers and the instructors on how they may wish to direct or modify the delivery of the primary content. In its intentional form, backchanneling can be helpful at encouraging critical thinking in the learner, and we'll talk about how that works a little bit more in a little bit, as well as providing very useful feedback to the educator. We utilize computer-mediated communication to support this, and we'll talk about how that works exactly, but it can be done through a computer or a mobile device, either a cell phone or a tablet, and it can occur synchronously or asynchronously. Much of the literature tends to be focused on synchronous backchanneling. However, there's some examples of asynchronous backchanneling, and we'll talk about how that may be applied to a distance-based learning environment. It's important for the instructor to consider whether or not visibility will be allowed for just the instructor, meaning the backchannel can be viewed only by the facilitator, or if the backchannel will be able to be viewed by the entire class. And certainly this will be critical in how the application is designed. And there's a lot of really great and free technologies that can be used towards backchanneling applications, and we'll talk about several of those here. So this is a great one called Lino, and it's a free collaborative software program that allows users to post to a single board, which sort of looks like a bulletin board here. I like to use the most basic example of sort of a parking lot where students can log in and during a real-time lecture or subsequent to a pre-recorded lecture or some type of learning activity can kind of post questions that have come up. This allows either the instructor to answer them in real time if the lecture is being delivered synchronously, or allows either students or the instructor to respond back through posting. Another example here would be using a Google document. Here we've created something in our program that we call the list, which is an opportunity for students to sort of describe an idea and then add some details to it, provide some resources, and include their name so other students know who contributed. You can also use these collaborative Google documents for collaborative note-taking, and Google actually has the ability to backchannel integrated into their Google Slides application. So it's similar, Google Slides is similar to Google's version of PowerPoint basically, and built into that is the ability to provide sort of an ongoing backchannel and commentary available to the users during the session. I think most people are probably familiar with Twitter, which was not intentionally designed for educational use but has been applied in the educational setting. And one of those applications is to use it for backchanneling, so to support with specific hashtags the ability to communicate about an individual course content topic. And then unlike Twitter, which is public, so anything you post on Twitter, the whole world can see, there are other similar applications like this one, Backchannel Chat, which is a private application. It's free for a small number of users. As you increase the number of users, the fee increases slightly. And it's really great. It serves somewhat of the similar features to Twitter in that you can sort of comment and use tagging, but it's only contained in the for the folks who have the link to it. So there's a really great EdTech blog written by Bruff in 2010, and he looked at different ways that backchannels could be used in education. So we've already talked about some of the benefits of collaborative note-taking as well as resource sharing. A lot of the research and exposure that I could find dealt a lot with sort of commenting and debating through utilization of educational backchannels. And then there's a concept called amplifying, which is the ability for students to sort of direct the conversation through an up or down vote, where they can sort of vote about where they'd want to see the conversation take place. In the setting of Twitter, this can occur through retweeting, or you could use a polling software like a Poll Everywhere. It's also an opportunity to ask questions both of the instructor and of each other. And there's a great educational example in something that was called the Twitter Experiment, which was turned into sort of a YouTube film. And the link here is included, as is a QR code that will take you to that video. And it is about a woman named Dr. Monica Rankin out of UT Dallas, who is a history professor there. And she was interested in trying to create increased engagement in sort of a lower level, large group, lecture-based course. And she decided to try using Twitter. And so what she did is she grouped students in small groups. They would discuss and then post things using specific hashtags, and those hashtags would then foster additional debate and conversation sort of through this media application, the social media application. And both she and the students really found it to be helpful at enhancing the level of class participation and engagement. Dr. Rankin commented that she found it was really helpful for sort of engaging all students in these opportunities, as opposed to just students who were more extroverted or tended to be frequent, like verbal participators in class previously. She also noted that it really helped to extend the conversation beyond just the class time. So not only were students engaged in the class itself, but she found that students continued the conversation after class was over. They would go home and continue to tweet about it and talk about it online. She even commented that she was able to engage with the students on a week that she couldn't be there. So she was traveling for work and the TA was running the course, but she was still able to log on and participate in the discussion and the debate. And she felt like that was really meaningful to the students, sort of that extension of community. The students that were interviewed as part of the Twitter experiment talked about how they really felt like they were a part of the class as opposed to sort of just passively sitting there getting information fed to them. So it's a really great video if you get the chance to check it out. So as you can tell, kind of based on what I've shared and the themes that come out when you read articles about using back channels in education, those by Bruff in 2010, as I previously discussed, Khalil in 2014, and Said and Giordano in 2014, you really get this sense that one of the main benefits is that students can direct the conversation, that it's this ability for students to have input and to be really engaged and thoughtful about what they want to get out of the experience in the course. It's an opportunity for students to work collaboratively and to really build that community as well as extend the classroom. Said and Giordano noted in that 2014 article that students really have an opportunity to provide feedback to the instructors about what's particularly interesting to them in the course. And instructors get this amazing insight into how the student is developing their understanding of the topic, where they wouldn't have that otherwise in a traditional lecture-based setting. It's also a way for instructors to gather perceptions about how the lesson was executed. And Yates et al. In 2015 discussed this, and we're going to talk about her research in a moment, but that there's really a nice opportunity to provide some peer-to-peer assistance in education. So some great student benefits as part of utilizing back-channeling. So looking to the literature, I thought I'd review some educational outcomes. Much of the educational research to date has focused a lot on sort of how students are receptive to use of back-channeling as a modality. And Camille in 2014 looked at Twitter as a back channel in a large pharmacology lecture course. So this they enrolled 266 students, and mostly were focused on sort of how the students liked the application of back channeling, or how they felt like it applied to the course. And so most of the students felt like it was easy to follow, wasn't distracting in class. Many of them felt like it was a useful tool for asking questions, and interestingly, in their qualitative analysis of sort of written in comments, students specifically noted that they liked not having to raise their hands, which I thought was really interesting. Interestingly, 93% of the students surveyed were happy that it wasn't mandatory, and a majority of them also felt like either they appreciated or they didn't have strong feelings, but that they valued the fact that it was an anonymous process. So in the Camille study, students were not identified by name, so it was anonymous when they were asking questions or engaging through the back channel, and that was viewed favorably by the student body. This Yates et al. Article in 2015 was also really interesting. They used back-channeling across nursing schools in Australia. So they had 5 campuses, and traditionally they would have a lecture at one site and then video conference it into the other sites. And as one can imagine, they had an issue with low levels of student engagement. And so they tried a back channel to see if that was help. And they did show a lot of positive improvement from that back channel for use during the lectures. They did find in their study that students who were younger had notable improved comfort with use of the application. That may not be surprising to those of us who work with a lot of learners, that often students who are digital natives tend to be more adaptable and more accepting of new technologies and engaging multiple technologies at the same time. The Yates article did find a similar importance of anonymity that was talked about by their students, and they did an interesting breakdown in sort of looking at the back channel and what the kind of content of the post was directed at. And so they found what I thought was fascinating. 49% of all the comments or posts on their back channel were peer-to-peer student responses. So like a student would ask a question, and then before the instructor could even get to answering it, multiple peers had often responded, provided feedback, answered the question, provided references. So you're really getting not only that sense of community, but that sense of sort of collaborative work on the part of the student. 24% of the back channel comments related to content queries, so like additional questions deeper into the content material. 18% was for clarification, so things that someone might not have understood, and less than 9% of the back channel content was related to technology issues, and they did find that those decreased over time. And finally, there was a really wonderful dissertation done by Donnelly in 2016. She did a very in-depth qualitative analysis of back-channel content from multiple sources, and she was trying to get a sense of both whether or not there was reflective thinking present as part of the back channel, but also what were things that were supportive of making back channels successful. And so in the 26 different back channels that she analyzed transcripts from, she utilized sort of a validated measurement tool to assess that reflective thinking, and found that in all 26 of them, there was positive improvement or positive annotation of reflective thinking. She also did 7 student interviews and found that all of them felt that the back channels improved the complexity of their thinking related to the course, and that all of them had hoped to see back channeling used in additional courses. With regards to what made backchanneling successful, Donnelly 2016 noted that it was clear that thoughtful curricular integration was key. So it wasn't something that you could just say, oh, I'm going to use backchanneling and throw it into any lecture or course that you wanted, that it had to be thoughtful and it had to be well designed, and the faculty had to be comfortable with managing both the front channel, which is, delivery of a lecture or facilitation of a group, and management of the back channel piece of things. The key elements that seem to be most important for a successful experience include sort of that connectivity of learners, so making sure everyone was connected and engaged, that there was opportunities for interactivity, so it wasn't just the ones that had the most reflective thinking and the most successful outcomes were sort of going beyond just Q&A and were really sort of engaging in interactive dialogue, and that there was a clear presence of the faculty member as a part of the back channel. So when we kind of consider the strengths and weaknesses of backchanneling as an educational modality, I think it's clear that this is a very student-centered approach that enhances engagement of students in the educational setting. It really helps to promote instructor awareness and provide them with real-time feedback so that they can make corrections, modifications, and redirect the discussion as necessary. And it's been really helpful, I think, when you read through the research at sort of building community within classrooms and supporting collaborative work efforts amongst students. A lot of the research focused on benefits to large class sizes and lecture-based content. This was important to me because that's sort of the cohort that I teach. We have a traditionally lecture-based curriculum, and in the second year, well, the bulk of that time is spent in clinical rotations. When they're back at the program, the majority of those times do involve lectures, and so I'm looking for a way to help make those more engaging and provide students with a more active student-centric role in that. Some of the weaknesses related to backchanneling, they do require access to devices. This is certainly something important to consider, and we'll talk about this when we talk about sort of models for media selection, but ensuring that students either would have a computer, a tablet, or a mobile device would be necessary. Now, the Twitter experiment does talk about how Dr. Rankin thought about this and was able to get around it, and she had students who didn't have those types of access write down what they wanted to include in the Twitter discussion, and then they would give it to the TA, and the TA would type it in so they could still be part of the large group forum. As one might appreciate, this could potentially be distracting both to the students but also potentially to the professor if they're not able to sort of manage the on-the-fly getting feedback from learners and incorporating that into their talk moving forward. So I think it does take the right instructor in the right application. And as I mentioned before, depending on the modality that you choose, it may be a public forum. And I think I know I'm very thoughtful about when I want my students to have comments that may be viewed publicly and when I would want that to be in a private forum. So making sure that you're selecting a tool that is right for your setting is going to be important. And then I think there are assessment considerations. That one of the studies that we talked about how they didn't want it to be mandatory, but certainly depending on how it's structured, it may be important that students are participating in this type of ongoing dialogue and thinking about how participation may be awarded, or if there's an assessment component, what that might look like and how it would be tied to a back channel. So ensuring thoughtful selection of media is really important. As I've mentioned, it's not best practice to just choose a form of media and apply it any which way in any context. So Bates has sort of outlined a model for media selection, which is very helpful in thinking through all of these things. I was able to apply each of these areas to my current course and think about it in the context of backchanneling, and I felt like it was a really good fit. In terms of our student demographics and their access to technology, all of our students, as part of their technology package, have both laptops as well as mobile devices provided to them in the form of tablets. So this is something that would be good for us. They are typically very adept at using multiple technologies by the time they are at this phase in the program. And so this would be, I think, not a big stretch for them. All of the modalities I looked at were either no cost or very low cost. And I think my goal for teaching and sort of the instructional strategies was to improve student engagement, and that is absolutely what the data shows that back-channeling does. We talked about how it can be beneficial for increasing student interaction. And from an organizational standpoint, I was not particularly concerned because this wasn't a widespread or global institutional impact. This was sort of on a course by course or lesson by lesson type of influence. From a networking perspective, we kind of talked about that same thing with regards to access. Students will have access to the web as well as to Wi-Fi in their current setting, and so that's not an issue. I think security and privacy is the biggest one that needs to be considered, particularly given the data. Students' interest in potential anonymity is important, as well as whether or not you're choosing a public forum like Twitter versus a private forum, and some of the other ways that we discussed. Similarly, at my institution, typically Google Docs is, or any type of Google collaborative software is not approved by our IT department, and so we do need to look for other collaborative software tools when we're thinking about using things on the cloud. So now we're going to get into the practical applications and kind of look at those three learning outcomes that we talked about previously and think about how back-channeling may be applied to them using some of the evidence that we've talked about previously to enhance those learning outcomes. So with regards to learning outcome on creating a CV or resume, I thought currently this is delivered in an in-class lecture. Maybe one or two students has a chance to ask a question, and I felt like this could really be enriched through back-channeling. It would provide opportunities for real-time questions. Students who may be uncomfortable raising their hand and asking a question, studies show would feel more comfortable posting in this sort of anonymous forum. And it would be an opportunity to continue the conversation. So oftentimes these are delivered on days that we have a lot of content to cover and not a lot of time. And so any remaining questions that students have could be posted, and then there would be an opportunity for either the faculty or the content expert to make sure all of those questions got addressed so students really felt heard. I think this is also an opportunity potentially to engage both faculty and an outside content expert. So oftentimes when a content expert comes in, the faculty sort of just sits there as a participant, and while that's fine, it would be nice to be more actively engaged in the course. And so one of the things that came up in the Twitter experiment was that sometimes it was helpful to have a TA or someone who could kind of monitor and summarize the back channel for the faculty member who is trying to facilitate. In this context, I would propose that the faculty member be that collator of information, and then the content expert could potentially then targetedly answer questions. And so I'd like to propose sort of the use of Lino to do this. So you can see here's an example of CV resume development, and then here are some questions that students have. These are sort of two different topics. These are two topics sort of opposing views. And so by having this opportunity, the instructor who's facilitating the session can really kind of dig in and make sure that students are getting their individualized questions answered. They're able to sort of collectively look at what are the questions of the group and answer them together. So the next potential application is that learning objective to improve medical billing and coding. And the current model is pedagogical and passive. It's typically given either in an in-person or pre-recorded lecture. And admittedly, it's not a very exciting topic and it's not delivered in a very exciting way. So I was interested to look for enhancement that would engage students in a more exciting way. And I also wanted to provide students with an opportunity to discuss this on a more longitudinal basis. So I felt like using a back channel would hopefully increase student engagement and allow students to provide ongoing feedback both synchronously and asynchronously. So our students are typically across the entire state during their clinical rotations and sometimes out of state, and so I wanted them to have an opportunity that they could still engage in this content with both the faculty instructor and their peers, even if they were remote. And so I thought using a method like back channel chat would be really helpful. I felt like this was probably not ideal content to be in a public forum, but back channel chat could be used during the lecture. If it's provided in class, students can ask questions, students can comment, but then if you look, student 2 is sort of asking a question and then reflecting on something that they talked about with their preceptor in clinic that day. So my hope is that it's one of those examples that could continue outside of the classroom in an ongoing basis with real-world application for students longitudinally. And finally, I wanted to address the professional development piece. And the current model is to do this in a variety of different sort of either in-class or pre-recorded lectures. And again, it's very passive. Students ask limited questions. And it doesn't feel like it's very engaging to them as they enter this new and exciting profession. And so I wanted to make it more active as well as have increased engagement. I also really wanted this to be an opportunity for them to develop professional social media skills. I think this is a big area of talk in medical education in particular. And I think a few years ago, our inclination was to say, just don't use social media. And if you're going to use it, really just post pictures of food and cats, and please don't ever talk about your day or your profession or anything related to that. But now I think we're really entering into an era where students need to know how to manage their professional identities in an online environment. And so I thought that this would be really helpful as well as a way to engage in collaborative resources. And so I'd like to propose the use of Twitter to do this. I thought it was appropriate to do it in a public forum so that they can learn how to manage their public professional identities, and that this could be used to back channel and respond to feedback on a variety of sort of professional preparedness things, from how to get a medical license to DEA registration, things like that, as well as sort of ongoing professional issues. So in the PA profession, we're talking about things like optimal team practice and when new states pass laws about certain things. And so this will be an opportunity for students to tweet about it, share resources, make recommendations, all while sort of managing that professional identity. So those were my 3 recommended applications for utilizing back channels both synchronously and asynchronously in our physician assistant program. And I really enjoyed getting to learn more about this topic. I encourage you to visit some of these really rich educational resources regarding back channeling. And if anyone has questions or comments, I'd love to continue the discussion. And I look forward to hearing your thoughtful feedback. Thank you.